The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the House of Representatives and our nation's capital, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We are so pleased to connect you today with Congressman R-5th, representing the 5th District of Virginia. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Woody. I'm delighted to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about your district, its diversity, geography, economy.
Well, you know, I represent Virginia's 5th District, which runs from the North Carolina line all the way north, all the way up to Fauquier County in Warrenton, Virginia. It runs from the foothills of the Blue Ridge in Martinsville and Henry County all the way east to Lawrenceville and Brunswick County. You start getting into peanuts and cotton. It is the largest of the 11 congressional districts. I sometimes get a little grief from Morgan Griffith about that. He claims otherwise by some other calculation, but the bottom line is ours is the largest. We have 23 counties and cities, and it's over 10,000 square miles. It's larger than many states. It's larger than the state of Vermont and larger than the state of New Hampshire. It's almost the same size as the state of Massachusetts. It's a beautiful district that really, the western margin runs the ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountain basically from North Carolina all the way up to the top of the state. And so everything east of that ridge is the 5th District. Everything west either belongs to the 6th District or the 9th District. And so you can imagine how picturesque it is. You can imagine, of course, how much it is dependent on agriculture. So it's a very rural district, very agricultural based. We also are very proud of the manufacturing and small business that we have in the district, located primarily in the smaller towns that you find in the 23 counties and cities. And so it's a beautiful district. Also has a tremendous amount of history. Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, is in the 5th District. James Monroe's home, Ashland Highland, is also in Albemarle County. John Marshall's home, Oak Hill, up in Fauquier County, is also located there. Patrick Henry's home, Red Hill, is located in Charlotte County. We have also have Appomattox Battlefield, Appomattox Courthouse, where the surrender was 150 years ago this year. I always like to point this out also. The first member of Congress from Virginia's 5th District was James Madison. Now, his district subsequently has been redistricted, or his home has subsequently been redistricted out of the 5th District, but I always I like to point that out, and I also like to remind folks just you know, what a great patriot he was in terms of the adoption of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, and anyway, it's a fantastic district.
Interesting. You mentioned John Marshall, who was the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, he set forth an opinion years and years ago, which is still debated today, about separation of powers and the role of the courts in our democracy.
Absolutely. He was called the Great Chief Justice, and Marbury versus Madison, of course, was the opinion that he wrote that really established the court as a co-equal among the three branches. And I think that when you look at sort of the development of our laws over the years, we all recognize really how important the court has been in curbing the powers of the presidency and curbing the powers of the Congress, or to say it another way, making sure that what Congress does and what the president does is constitutional. And so very important figure, and I'm very proud to represent that county. And it's interesting to note there is a portrait of him that is located on the west side of the House chamber, facing west, which I think is interesting. It's actually on the gallery level. but it faces west. So in many ways, he's facing Fauquier County, I like to think.
Oh, is that right?
And if you go to the courthouse in Fauquier County at Warrenton, that same portrait also hangs over the bench in what used to be the Fauquier County Circuit Court.
Now, you hail from Pennsylvania County, Chatham, is
That's
it?
correct.
And I know there are a number of historical artifacts you have in your office here in the House Office Building. Tell us about your office.
Well, we, you know, when I was first elected, I was one of 87, and so there's a House lottery to determine which office you get, and so depending on the number that you draw, the higher the number, the more choices you have, and so they go through a whole afternoon where people who draw their numbers, their lots, then go through and they pick whatever's left. Kathy and I, my wife and I, showed up on the appointed date, and we drew our lot. And out of 87 members, I drew number 87. And so I was on the fourth floor of Longworth for for 2 years, and that was without question the smallest office in the Capitol. This last Congress, beginning of the last Congress, we moved to the Cannon Office Building. So we are in a great location that's very convenient to the metro. And if you come to our office, you'll find a whole lot of artwork that reflects certainly American history. We have scenes in our office of some of the historical figures that we talked about: Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. We also have Booker T. Washington, who was from Franklin County. On the walls there. We also have in my office scenes from Jamestown, the ships that came over in Jamestown in 1607, as well as scenes from Williamsburg, Patrick Henry delivering his Stamp Act speech in 1765, and then we close out that period with a painting of the surrender of Yorktown, which of course is also located in the U.S. Capitol. But you know, I often say that and maybe I'll get a little grief from my colleagues from around the country, but I often say that, you know, in a lot of ways we're all Virginians. The history of Virginia is the history of America, and sounds like I'm bragging a little bit. I don't mean to. It is what it is.
Now, you mentioned your district going as far as the borderline of North Carolina, and I know Danville isn't part of your district. That small town has been an economic straits for quite a while. Are things improving there now?
I think so. Listen, we really in the last 20 years have seen tremendous changes in our economy there. When I was a boy growing up in the 80s, you know, tobacco was still king. Manufacturing, furniture and textiles, both king. Martinsville, which is just a few miles away from Danville, was the wealthiest city per capita. It was a small city, but the wealthiest city per capita in the United States at one time, and it was a seat of the world headquarters for a number of furniture and textile manufacturing companies that really made the greatest products in the world and exported them all over the world. Our economy has changed a lot as a consequence of, I think, a lot of different factors. And as a consequence, we've had to kind of remake things one job at a time. A lot of it, and of course, it goes without saying that, you know, it's led by private sector investment and ingenuity, but it is also complemented, I think, by local economic developers, local government officials, state government officials. You know, a lot of folks have been working hard, I think, to create opportunities and to attract the investment that we need. We recently had, we were talking earlier, a wonderful announcement in Henry County that amounts to a significant new investment and expansion of a current business called Monogram Foods in Martinsville and Henry County that amounts to about 100 more jobs. They have been there for a number of years and have just grown and grown and grown because of the again, they're making something that other people want. And they're doing an excellent job at it, and so it's very thrilling to see that sort of expansion of jobs. But I think it goes to the heart of what I think my job is here in Washington, and that is every single day look for ways to make it easier for our businesses to succeed, because that's what will create the jobs necessary and the jobs that our people need. We still have very high unemployment compared to the national average. I think that the current unemployment numbers that are reported by the Department of Labor mask a great swath of people who have given up work and don't work. We have, I think the figures are, we have, relatively speaking, the fewest number of people working in this country than we've had in many years, and we need to adopt energy policy, labor policy, environmental policy, healthcare policy in Washington, again, that encourages job creation and encourages growth, as opposed to what I feel like people think about Washington doing all the time, what I believe Washington has done for far too long, and that is just put up barriers, roadblocks, costs, mandates, things that just make it harder and harder for the small business or the family farmer to succeed.
Yeah, I think those numbers, those employment numbers, even though they were encouraging, I think the gross domestic product actually shrank.
That's correct. It did, and I think that I think it is one more symptom of a chronic problem that we have in terms of really digging out from what was a catastrophic crisis in 2008. It's important to note, though, because of the position of many of the localities in the 5th District, the diminished position, in a lot of ways, we had a lot less distance to fall than some places. But again, people, individuals, individual businesses and employers, employees, all of the folks that are a part of making an area successful for business have been working hard, and those investments pay off.
Talk to us a little bit more about the importance of agriculture, not only in your district but in the state, because as you know, the Port of Virginia is a vital economic driver for the state, and there's a lot of exports going abroad.
Absolutely. So of course, agriculture and forestry together comprise, I believe, about $75 billion in economic output for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Again, the Virginia's 5th District being the largest congressional district, we have more agricultural production than any other congressional district, and it's significant. It ranges from dairy to beef to grains of all kinds. It ranges from fruits and orchards, and the growing grape or wine industry, the growing brewery industry, the growing cidery industry. Now we're starting to see distilleries that are locating in the 5th District. But anyway, the agricultural production is huge. Tobacco is still a huge crop for Virginia's 5th District. And I believe that we are certainly the leader in Virginia in terms of tobacco production. I say all that to say that the exports that you mentioned are extremely important, and of course we have some things that are coming up here in Washington that I'm very focused on right now, in terms of trying to find new markets for our agricultural products. If you talk to a lot of our farmers who literally sell soybeans that end up being exported to places like China, right. We want to try to figure out how to grow more and export more to those countries, because it's a good thing for our farmers. Same with beef and other grain production. So anyway, so we have some bills that are making their way through the legislature now. One of them deals with Trade Promotion Authority, which would give the President the authority to enter into some final negotiations relating to trade agreements that might be enacted down the road that are still very early in the process. But this authority would be given the President, an authority that the President has had, every President has had going back almost 100 years. And the other thing to point out is that what's different about what we have on the deck today is different from previous trade promotion authority type legislation is this puts a huge amount of constraint on the president in terms of instructing him specifically what it is that we want to negotiate for and what is off the table. And I think it's really important for people because there's a lot of misinformation that has been flowing around about it. But it's really important to note that the Trade Promotion Authority is online. Any American citizen can go and read it. And it's there plain for all to see. And it highlights, I think, a lot of the restrictions and I think a lot of the reforms that go along with this Trade Promotion Authority because there are, frankly, a lot of people who don't trust this president. But with that said, the bottom line is that nothing gets done unless Congress enacts it. And if there is ultimately a trade agreement that is reached between among the parties, especially as it relates to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, if that comes to fruition, it will not be passed unless Congress approves it. And so I think that you're going to have a lot of people who want to give the president this authority to continue with the negotiations. Negotiations, by the way, that President Bush began prior to President Obama's election. And we will see, and we'll look at the whatever comes up, and if it's a good bill, it should be passed. If it's a bad bill, it should be defeated.
Now, the committee process is just as important here as it was when you were in the General Assembly in Richmond, Virginia. Talk to us about your committee assignments and why they are important to your constituents.
Well, I'm on the Financial Services Committee, which is where all legislation relating to banking, credit unions, public markets, exchanges. We have jurisdiction over the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is an agency that regulates public companies and their conduct to ensure fair markets and efficient markets, to ensure investor protection, and to ensure capital formation. That is that we have rules that make sense and that encourage capital formation as opposed to discourage it. We have also jurisdiction over the housing in this country, as well as the GSEs, the government-sponsored entities, also known as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We have jurisdiction generally over those things. Limited jurisdiction over insurance, because in many ways, insurance, of course, is regulated at the state level, and we don't have jurisdiction over health insurance. We don't have any jurisdiction over the Affordable Care Act. But anyway, to me, that committee is very important for this reason. I don't believe that you will ever see the real dynamic, sustainable growth and job growth that we need in southern central Virginia, in the 5th District of Virginia, unless you have free and unfettered access to capital. It's private sector capital that grows the economy. It is private sector capital when appropriately deployed in the marketplace. I believe that's when you'll see the real job growth that we need. These main streets all across the 23 counties and cities that I've mentioned, all the main streets, the little towns. We represent 50 towns across the 5th District. Every one of those main streets needs access to that capital in order to start a business or maintain a business or grow a business. And so I think it's important to our constituents. My service on that committee is important for that reason. We've introduced a number of pieces of legislation that in that committee that would, I think, foster access to capital, streamlining some of the regulatory process at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to help encourage small public companies to grow. And so we will continue to work on that. But I think it's extremely important for job growth.
And then what other committee assignments?
That is my only one, because it's an A committee. It's considered a full-time prospect. So that's where I'm on 3 subcommittees. So I'm on the Capital Markets Subcommittee, the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, as well as Oversight Committee. And I really, in my 4 years here, I really have enjoyed being on that committee. And we've got a good chairman, Chairman Jeb Hensperling, who from Texas, who I think shares certainly my passion for wanting to expand access to capital to see real sustainable job growth.
Now, both of those bills you mentioned lessen the burden on small businesses in terms of disclosures to the public markets, so to speak.
So we recently had success with legislation in our Financial Services Committee. These bills, I hope, will advance to the House floor. But both of them dealt with not jeopardizing in any way, shape, or form investor protection, but reducing the cost and the redundant requirements that are imposed. One deals with reports that small public companies have to make as it relates to disclosures that are required.
Mm-hmm.
They are required to be made in one format, but the SEC enacted a rule recently that required them to report in a second and additional format that's very expensive and time-consuming, doesn't add anything to investor protection. We had witnesses that testified that investors who were looking at this information had never even heard of the format in which it was supposed to be reported. We would like to see the SEC move to one format, but in the meantime, until they get to one format, we don't think that people, especially small companies, should have to report this exact same information twice. And then the second bill deals with a retrospective review. Most federal agencies are required on a 10-year window to go back and look at regulations that they've adopted to just do some housekeeping, making sure that that regulations make sense and that they should be renewed. And that's what our second bill did. Both of these bills, by the way, have bipartisan support. They're common sense measures. And it's my hope that we'll see bipartisan support for them on the floor, that we can find support for them in the Senate, and good gracious, maybe have the President sign one of them.
Now, what about the Federal Reserve Board and in this program of quantitative easing that's been going on for a number of years now, and also the ability of the Congress to audit the Federal Reserve Board?
Well, I think that the Fed requires more transparency. There's no question about it. The decisions that get made in the Star Chamber about interest rates, about the aggressive debt purchasing, also known as quantitative easing, really have a significant effect on the economy and our recovery. There are those who say, and it's very hard to go back to 2008 and relive that crisis, and it's very hard to go back and second guess a lot of the decisions that were made, simply because of the climate of terror that was existing at the time. There are a lot of things that I would have done differently if I had been able to control them. But I would say that certainly the Federal Reserve's policy that essentially began then of a zero interest rate policy has, I think a lot of people have said that has really prolonged and delayed a full recovery in this country, and masked what are really underlying problems that Congress needs to address. And when I think about what the big picture is, and why it is that I ran the first time and why I continue to serve, I think about the big picture, the long picture. We spend $4 trillion a year as a nation. We borrow 14 cents on every dollar we spend. Let me say that again. We spend $4 trillion on everything from defense to every discretionary item, to all of our Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and debt service. All that amounts to $4 trillion. We borrow 14 cents on every dollar to support that. And 2/3 of that $4 trillion, by the way, are those three items that I mentioned: Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and debt service.
All the entitlement programs plus the debt service.
And so the point is this: we are still borrowing money to sustain that spending, at the same time that we have borrowed $18 trillion. So we spend 4, we've borrowed 18. Think about what the size of the American economy is. It's $18 trillion. So we're spending, or we have borrowed what amounts to the value of our annual gross domestic product. That should trouble each one of us because that chart's a very dark, I think, future, paints a very dark picture for our future when you look at those numbers in a real way. The reason I bring all that up is to say that when you have an economy propped up by quantitative easing, in a lot of ways, what the Federal Reserve has done is save politicians from having to make tough choices about how you reform, especially the drivers of our debt, which are, again, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. How do you reform those programs in a way that strengthens them for today, ensures that everybody who is in the program or going to be on it anytime soon will be given what they were promised. But how do you do that for today? But also make sure it's there for future generations, because right now, both Medicare and Social Security are slated to go bankrupt in the next 15 years. So these are decisions that we can make now if we have the guts to do it. I think they should be made now, because every day we wait is a day closer to which it's going to be a much uglier picture to get to reform them for the future.
Yeah, those are good points. Do you think that the younger generation understands what's going on in those terms and the impact it's going to have?
I think it depends. I mean, I think if you look at young adults who are just entering the work world, I think there's data out there that shows that many of them don't believe that they'll ever see Social Security and Medicare because they have no confidence that the government will have the guts to do what's necessary. Of course, there are even the younger folks who probably don't think about being sick or being old. So I think that you have some of that. But I have 3 children, and I talk to so many people who are my age who have young children. I talk to so many people whose children are grown. They have grandchildren. This is something that worries every American. They think about the fact that we have grown up. We've been blessed to grow up in the greatest country on earth with the most opportunity, the most prosperity, the most freedom, and we are really jeopardizing the future for future our children, our grandchildren, to enjoy those same opportunities. And that's not right, and it's not American, and people, I think, recognize that. So when I think about the big issues, obviously job creation is the most immediate issue for our congressional district, but I also think the big picture requires us to really get to it on some of these reforms that we really need to get serious about.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.